Tonight we'll drift into another gentle corner of history, the kind that soothes rather than startles. This is a story for winding down, for letting the day's weight slide quietly away. So, dim your lights, settle under your blanket, let the cool hush of the night surround you. And as you settle in, I wonder, where in the world are you listening from tonight? And what time is it there in your own quiet corner? Wherever you are, know this. You're in good company here. You're safe and you're welcome. If this calm journey helps you relax, perhaps you'll tap like and subscribe. Only if it feels right. No hurry, no pressure. Just breathe. Now, let's travel back to Victorian England, to a time when dinner wasn't just a meal but a ritual. And curiously enough, arriving too early to one of these dinners could bring about more embarrassment than showing up late. Let me tell you why. Imagine with me, the year is 1856. Gas lamps glow with a faint hum along cobbled London streets. The air is cool, faintly smoky from fireplaces stacked high with coal, and tucked inside a handsome townhouse, a dinner party is being prepared. The clinking of silverware, the faint rustle of skirts, the creak of polished boots along a wooden staircase. Now, here's the curious bit. If you, as a guest, arrive too early, say 15 or 20 minutes before the appointed hour, you are committing what many Victorians considered a social crime. Not a crime with fines or jail, but a crime of manners, a faux pas of the gravest variety. Why? Because to arrive early was to catch your host unready, hairpins not yet set, puddings still wobbling in their moulds, servants scurrying about like startled mice. The dinner bell, you see, was like the conductor's baton in an orchestra. Everything had to be timed with perfection. Soup must be steaming, roast must be carved at its juiciest. Candles lit not too soon, or they'd gutter away, but not too late or the room would look half-dressed. To arrive early was like walking into a theatre while the actors were still rehearsing lines. It was, shall we say, the Victorian equivalent of opening Netflix before the Wi-Fi has quite loaded. Let me tell you of a gentleman. Let's call him Henry, because nearly every third man in London seemed to be called Henry, who once made this very mistake. Henry prided himself on punctuality. His father, a stern man of clocks and timetables, had instilled it in him. Better 15 minutes early than 5 minutes late, his father always said. So one evening Henry arrives for a dinner at Lady Marchmont's townhouse, 15 minutes ahead of the chime. He thought he'd be admired for his promptness. Instead, he was ushered, red-faced, into the front hall by a footman who very nearly groaned aloud at the sight of him. The drawing room was half set. Lady Marchmont herself was upstairs still fastening pearls. Henry was offered a chair in the hall beside a rather awkward umbrella stand, where he could sit and listen to the faint sound of the kitchen in chaos. Dishes clattering, a cook shouting for more time, a pudding nearly dropped. That, my friend, was Henry's punishment. An early guest became, well, a nuisance, and so, in polite society, lateness was forgivable, fashionable even. To be late meant one swept in at just the right moment, when the stage was set, candles aglow, the soup not yet served but ready to pour. To be early, though, was to spoil the illusion, to peek behind the curtain of civility. Now imagine, you're standing there as Henry did, coat slightly damp from the fog outside, shoes squeaking faintly against marble tiles. You cough, you fidget, you study the umbrella stand more closely than you ever wished to. And above, you hear Lady Marchmont muttering to her maid, "Who could that possibly be so soon?" The embarrassment warms your cheeks more fiercely than any fire could. Have you ever done that yourself? Arrived somewhere too early, only to find the host still in slippers, rushing about with half-done preparations? That odd hovering feeling, like you've trespassed into a backstage where you shouldn't be. That's exactly how the Victorians saw it, except magnified by a society obsessed with rules of politeness. And these rules were endless. Forks arranged just so. Napkins folded with almost military precision. Courses marching out in a grand parade. Soup, fish, meat, pudding, cheese, each carefully timed. A Victorian dinner was less about eating than about display. A theatre of good taste. And theatre cannot have an audience strolling in before the curtains rise. I sometimes think of it like the closest thing they had to a hot pocket, those grand puddings. Timing was everything, A pudding steamed too long collapsed. A pudding served too soon sat heavy and damp. To bring one out at precisely the right moment was the pride of any cook. And for a guest to appear early, to throw off the rhythm, well, it was as though someone had rung the school bell while the teacher was still drawing on the board. And so Henry sat, silent, waiting for the official hour. When at last the clock chimed and the other guests began to arrive, fashionably 5, even 10 minutes late, he rose, smoothed his coat, and pretended he had only just stepped in himself. But Lady Marchmont never forgot. At tea the next day she remarked to her maid, "Poor Henry, a most eager man, almost too eager." And in Victorian society, eagerness was as unfashionable as socks with sandals today. So remember, if you ever invent a time machine and find yourself invited to a Victorian dinner, take your time. Stroll the garden first. Count the cobblestones. Listen to the carriage wheels. But whatever you do, don't ring the bell early. And as we leave that polished hall, Henry still sitting uncomfortably beside the umbrella stand, let your mind wander with me to the next table, the next course, the next curious custom that shaped their nights. Imagine now that we drift from Henry's awkward vigil beside the umbrella stand into another dining room, one a little warmer, with the faint glow of firelight painting the walls in a golden wash. You can almost hear the soft ticking of the mantel clock, the kind that marks each second with a sound just sharp enough to remind you of time passing, but gentle enough to lull you like the rhythm of waves. This is the home of the Pennington family, circa 1872. Their townhouse is less grand than Lady Marchmont's, but still comfortable, with velvet drapes, patterned wallpaper, and the faint scent of roast mutton mingling with beeswax polish. The dinner invitation said 7 o'clock, which, in Victorian code, meant you should arrive at 7:30. Yes, curiously enough, the printed hour was never the true one. Arriving exactly on time was suspicious, as though you'd been waiting outside, tapping your watch, desperate to burst in. The Penningtons knew this code. Their cook knew it too. She had been watching her puddings like a captain at sea watching the tide. The steamed sponge with currants was her pride and joy, balanced perfectly between lightness and weight, just sweet enough to coax a sigh from even the sternest uncle. Now can you picture that pudding? It's plump, a little glossy from its steaming, sitting in its mould like a crowned jewel. The smell is somewhere between bread and sugar, with a whisper of spice. Imagine biting into it, soft, warm, comforting, almost like a Victorian version of a marshmallow, if marshmallows had manners and wore waistcoats. The guests begin to arrive, but not too soon. They drift in like carriages pulling one by one into a driveway. A cousin here, an old school friend there. Each leaves their coat and hat in the hall, each greeted with murmurs of relief from the servants, because to arrive at the right late hour meant the household could breathe again. And yet, one guest did not know the code. A young woman named Clara, freshly returned from a stay in the countryside. She had been taught punctuality by her aunt, a woman who kept her clocks 5 minutes ahead. Clara arrived promptly at 7. She rang the bell, cheeks rosy from the cold, her gloved hands neatly folded. The maid who opened the door looked at her with the same expression one reserves for a squirrel wandering into a church. Polite, yes, but faintly alarmed. Clara was ushered into the drawing room, where Mr. Pennington sat in shirt sleeves still dictating a letter, and Mrs. Pennington had only half of her hair pinned up. Imagine her surprise, with one side of curls cascading freely, the other pinned into place. A sight rarely meant for guests' eyes. And here's the humour of it. In Clara's mind, she was the picture of respect. In theirs, she had blundered into sacred preparation space. The punishment was subtle but unmistakable. She was given the least comfortable chair, a narrow little seat with arms too tight for resting elbows. While the others later arrived to warmth and applause, Clara was already flushed, trying not to fidget as the clock crept forward. This was, in many ways, the Victorian form of buffering. Life before Wi-Fi still had its own loading screens. If you arrived too soon, you were stuck in that awkward limbo, present but not welcome yet. Have you ever felt that yourself? The hush of being somewhere too early, hearing doors shut, voices behind curtains, knowing you're intruding on someone's unfinished moment. It's a sensation both intimate and uncomfortable, like reading a diary left open by mistake. That was Clara's fate, and it would be whispered about long after the pudding had been eaten. As the night stretched on, the pudding arrived at last. Perfectly steamed, cut into slices, drizzled with custard so silky it pooled like sunlight on the plate. Guests sighed, forks clinked, conversation rose and fell like the crackle of a gentle fire. Clara ate too, of course, but she never quite recovered from her premature entrance. And in the polite code of the Victorians, such slips were remembered like watermarks on a letter, faint but permanent. Now, let your imagination linger on that pudding a moment longer. The soft weight of it, the fragrance of nutmeg and currants, the glow of candles reflected in polished spoons. Listen to the steady murmur of voices around the table and feel yourself sink into the rhythm. And as we leave the Penningtons' dining room, stepping out into the fog-softened streets once more, let your mind wander toward the next tale, another dinner, another peculiar custom waiting just beyond the gaslight's reach. The curious thing about Victorian meals is that they were not only about food, but about waiting. Waiting was in fact one of the main courses, and Clara, having arrived too soon, became painfully aware of just how long waiting could stretch. Picture her now, seated on that narrow little chair, the arms pressing in like a polite prison, the fabric scratchier than she remembered from last season's upholsterer. Around her, the room was half ready, the fire not yet built high enough to warm the farthest corners, so she sat with her shoulders tense, her gloves never quite losing their chill. Across the room, Mr. Pennington folded his letter with the deliberate care, as though he could fold Clara's unexpected presence right into the paper and tuck it away in a drawer. Mrs. Pennington smiled, of course. Hosts always smiled. But it was a smile that said, in the softest tones, "You should not have seen me like this." Her hairpins glinted faintly in the lamplight, like tiny soldiers still waiting for their orders. The minutes passed. They ticked, in fact, from the mantel clock, each one thudding louder in Clara's ears. Tick, tick, tick. What does one do when early? Conversation too soon is clumsy. Compliments fall flat. Clara attempted a remark about the lovely drapes, though truly the drapes had been out of fashion since 1869, and Mrs. Pennington nodded with the same energy one gives to a door-to-door salesman one cannot dismiss. But then, oh then, the sound of the bell. Salvation in brass. At 7:30, the first fashionable guest arrived, sweeping in with laughter, the scent of lavender water trailing behind her. And with her entry, Clara's early bird awkwardness was folded away, though not forgotten. Why such fuss, you might wonder? Why was lateness preferred, almost cultivated? The answer lies in the Victorian obsession with appearances. Dinner was theatre, and like any production, the audience should never see the rehearsal. The arrival of guests was the raising of the curtain. Too early, and you stumbled upon the actors still painting their faces, the stagehands adjusting the ropes. Now imagine the food itself waiting backstage. The soups, the roasts, the puddings, each one a character with its own timing. A roast beef, for example, required nearly 4 hours of careful cooking, but only a sliver of time when it was perfect, steaming and blushing just right in the centre. A blancmange had to be chilled, but not so long that it sweated onto the dish. A trifle, layered sponge, custard, fruit and cream had to be assembled with such precision it might as well have been an architectural feat. Arriving early risked seeing these characters half-dressed, unready for their cues. And so the Victorians devised this delicate ballet of timing, where the invitation said 7, but the true dance began at past, a secret code, unspoken, but universally known among those who valued reputation. Let us for a moment sink into the rhythm of such a dinner. The fire crackles now, stronger. Coats are handed over, hats brushed, gloves peeled away like layers of an onion. Conversation rises, the sound soft and mingled, like bees in a summer garden. The soup is carried in, the clatter of spoons faint but steady. Imagine the warmth of it. Perhaps a mulligatawny, spiced and rich, or a simple clear broth gleaming like amber in the candlelight. Each guest dips their spoon, pauses, smiles politely, And yet behind those smiles is calculation. Who arrived with just enough lateness? Who struck the perfect note of casual disregard for the printed hour? That was social alchemy, the kind that separated the truly polished from the merely punctual. Clara, poor Clara, felt the weight of her mistake with each spoonful. Even as the warmth of the broth spread through her, even as laughter loosened the air, she knew the tale of her early arrival would travel farther than she did. Gossip in Victorian drawing rooms spread quicker than steam on glass. Someone would mention it at tea, someone else would laugh at the image of her sitting alone in that tight chair. And so, her name would be attached, however lightly, to eagerness. A flaw more serious than lateness, more memorable than an ill-cooked pudding. I cannot help but smile at this, because truly, have you ever noticed? Our modern world is not so different. To arrive too early at a party now is to hover in the driveway, or circle the block, or sit in your car pretending to check your phone. We too fear being that awkward figure who forces the host to say, "Oh, you're here already." In that moment, centuries dissolve, and Clara's discomfort becomes our own. And so, dear listener, we tuck Clara's story away for now. She will go on, of course, to dance in the drawing rooms, to sip her wine, to eat her pudding with all the grace she can muster. But her name, like Henry's before her, will always hover in the footnotes of Victorian dinners, a gentle reminder that sometimes the only thing worse than being late is being too soon. Now, let the clinking of those spoons fade, let the fire dim, let the laughter soften into a hum. We step once more from the Penningtons' house, into the cool fog of the street where carriages wait like shadowed beasts, and as we walk, let your mind begin to wander toward the next tale. Now, let us drift, as softly as a candle flame, leaning into the night air, into another household, another table. Imagine the year is 1875, a winter evening when the fog presses low against the lamplit streets, and horse hooves make a muffled rhythm on damp cobblestones. Inside, velvet curtains are drawn, and a faint smell of baked custard lingers like a shy guest who hasn't left the room. This is the house of the Tillinghastes, who are known for serving the most elaborate fish course in their circle. Picture it, a gleaming silver platter, upon which rests a salmon so carefully prepared it looks like it might swim away if the candles flickered too hard. A sauce of melted butter and parsley trickles down its side, and the steam carries whispers of dill and lemon. Now here's the curiosity. Arrive too early, and you would have seen the cook still wrestling with that fish in the kitchen, scales flying like metallic confetti, the smell not yet transformed into elegance but still raw and briny. It is the difference between overhearing an aria rehearsed in broken syllables and hearing it sung beneath chandeliers. At the table, once the clock permits, the salmon becomes a character in its own right. Guests murmur polite praise, though some secretly prefer the beef to follow. Still, they dip their forks, letting the flakes fall apart like warm snow. I find it amusing to think, was this the Victorian version of our modern hot entree reveal? A little like unveiling a dish on a cooking show, except the applause was quieter, softened by lace cuffs and whispered compliments. Do you hear the clinking of crystal, the muted laughter of guests who have all conspired to arrive fashionably late? The timing, the rhythm, the theatre of it all. It was the invisible thread holding evenings together. And the punishable crime of arriving early was never about hunger, but about ruining the illusion. As you settle deeper into your pillow, imagine that platter of salmon cooling in the warm glow, steam rising in soft ribbons, conversation humming like a gentle lullaby around it. And as we let the fish course fade into the shadows of history, let us wander toward another tale, another taste, another curious note in the long symphony of Victorian dinners. Let us wander now into a townhouse along a quieter lane, where ivy curls around the railings, and the sound of carriage wheels is muffled by the hush of dusk. Inside, the lamps are being lit one by one, each flame trembling like a secret just revealed. Tonight's dinner is less about fish or roasts and more about something sweet, something that hums gently in the background of Victorian evenings, syllabub. Syllabub was a curious dessert, frothy and whimsical, made by pouring wine or cider into sweetened cream until it thickened into a kind of soft cloud. Imagine it, light, airy, resting in delicate glass cups, trembling when touched like a captured piece of mist. Served at the end of a long dinner, it was less about sustenance and more about charm, the way a lullaby doesn't fill the belly but quiets the spirit. Now picture arriving early to this dinner. You would have seen the cook whisking frantically, cream splattering, the mixture threatening to curdle if handled too roughly. Not quite the elegant illusion guests were meant to admire. Arriving on time, fashionably late of course, meant meeting Syllabub in its finished form, soft peaks catching the candlelight, flavoured with lemon zest and just a whisper of nutmeg. The Tillinghast's neighbour, Miss Havers, once made the error of showing up too soon for such a gathering. She walked in while the cook was still whisking, and forever after was known as the woman who saw the Syllabub before it had its dignity. A small thing, perhaps, but in Victorian society, these small things mattered more than we might believe. Do you hear the faint clink of spoons against glass? The low hum of voices mellowed by dessert wine? The Syllabub dissolves on the tongue almost instantly, leaving only sweetness and the faint memory of bubbles. Like a dream you can't quite hold on to upon waking, and so, as the guests laugh softly and the candles burn lower, let your mind follow that dissolving sweetness, carrying us gently onward toward the next chapter, where savoury and sweet mingle again in the quiet theatre of another Victorian night. Now, let us settle into another dining room, this one lined with dark oak panels that give off the faint scent of polish and age. A grandfather clock ticks softly in the corner, its pendulum swaying like a heartbeat that keeps the evening steady. Tonight's centrepiece is not pudding or syllabub, but the humble yet noble meat pie. Victorians loved a pie not just for its taste but for its presentation, the crust rising like a golden dome, steam trapped within as though secrets had been baked into its folds. Picture the knife breaking through the crust, a gentle crackle followed by the sigh of savoury air, gravy, herbs, perhaps a hint of onion, rich and soothing. The pie was both comfort and spectacle, something hearty to ground the long parade of courses. But again, imagine arriving early. You'd catch the kitchen before the crust had bronzed, while the filling still bubbled impatiently beneath, threatening to spill. The cook would glare, flower on her sleeves as if to say, "Not yet, not yet. Let the play reach its proper act." Guests were meant to see the pie at its proudest moment, the crust lifted high and whole, not mid-bake when it looked more like a collapsed hat than a dinner triumph. At the table, though, the pie was a unifier. Even the stiffest guest loosened a little when the slices were served, steam curling upward like soft ribbons, the smell wrapping everyone in quiet contentment. One guest, I recall from an 1869 journal entry, described the meat pie as the truest warmth of winter placed upon a plate. Can you hear the murmur of forks, the gentle scraping as crust breaks into buttery flakes? The fire hums behind it all, and the air is thick with comfort. This was Victorian theatre at its most approachable, its most human, the kind of dish that made laughter easier and conversation softer. And so, as the last crumbs of crust are brushed from the tablecloth and the gravy's warmth lingers like a fading embrace, let us step back into the night air once more. The street is quiet, the fog curling low, and another house waits with another tale, another dish, another small rule of timing that mattered more than we might think. Come with me now into a dining room that glows with candlelight so steady it feels like the air itself is holding its breath. This is the Bramwell household, where tonight's pride is not pudding or pie but the cheese course. Yes, in Victorian England, cheese had its own moment in the grand procession of dinner, like a quiet encore after the orchestra had thundered. Picture the table, wheels and wedges displayed on polished boards, Stilton standing tall in its crumbly dignity, cheddar glowing pale gold, a scattering of biscuits crisp and unassuming beside them. Grapes rest nearby, their skins cool and taut, the faintest sweetness clinging like dew at dawn. A glass of port waits, rich and ruby, meant to soften the sharper notes of the cheese. Now imagine arriving too early and stumbling into the kitchen before this quiet finale was ready. You'd find the Stilton still being carefully unwrapped from its cloth, its veins of blue not yet smoothed for presentation. The servants would frown, embarrassed, as if you had intruded on the cheese before it had put on its evening attire. For Victorians, timing wasn't just about food temperature, it was about dignity, about allowing even a wedge of Stilton the grace of a proper entrance. At the right moment, though, when the clock had passed and the guests were softened by wine and laughter, the cheese course felt almost like a lullaby. Conversation slowed, voices dropped, forks clinked more lazily. A guest might lean back, sigh contentedly, and let the tang of cheddar dissolve on the tongue like a thought unspoken. The fire crackled low, the room warmed gently, and one could almost sense sleep weaving its way closer. I find it charming to think of cheese as the closest thing Victorians had to our midnight snacks, a way of ending the night not with spectacle but with something simple, grounding and reassuring. Imagine that last bite, soft and savoury, paired with the hushed rustle of gowns and the low murmur of goodnights. And as the port glass is empty and the cheese boards are quietly carried away, let us step softly from the Bramwell's table into the cool air outside, ready to follow another story, another course, another small thread in the tapestry of Victorian dining. Now we find ourselves in a more modest setting, a village rectory in the year 1864. The walls here are not gilded but plastered, the floors creak when walked upon, and the dinner table, though smaller, carries its own air of ceremony. Tonight the star is not pudding or pie, nor even the noble wheel of Stilton, but something far simpler, bread. Ah, but bread in Victorian England was anything but plain. Fresh loaves, crusts browned from the oven, the inside soft and warm as a pillow just turned over. Imagine the knife pressing into it, the crust crackling gently, the steam rising with a smell so comforting it could silence an entire room. This was not theatre with chandeliers, but theatre with hearth and candle stub, where bread took the role of hero. Arrive too early, however, and you would witness the loaf still baking, the dough swollen but pale, the crust not yet hardened. The cook might shoo you out of the kitchen, muttering that the yeast had not yet worked its miracle. Bread was living food, and timing was its secret. A loaf cut too soon collapsed into heaviness, while one left too long hardened into something better suited for a doorstop than a plate. At the table, though, when served at just the right moment, bread was shared like a blessing. Slices passed hand to hand, butter spread in soft golden layers, crumbs scattered like confetti across the cloth. Even the sternest clergyman softened after his second slice, and children were known to giggle at the way butter melted down their fingers. Bread, humble bread, was a unifier. Close your eyes and imagine that sound, the tearing of crust, the sigh of steam released, the murmur of thanks whispered around the table. There is comfort here, simple and steady, the kind that asks for no grandeur. And so, as the last loaf is wrapped away for tomorrow, and the fire dwindles into a quiet bed of embers, let us slip out once more into the night. The street is calm, the stars faint behind drifting cloud, and another household waits, with another curious dish and another secret rule of timing in this long Victorian play. Step with me now into a manor house set against rolling fields, the year 1881. The windows glow faintly through the mist, and as the heavy door creaks open, a warmth washes over us like a shawl draped across the shoulders. Tonight the dinner table holds something that always caused a stir, jellies. Victorian jellies were not the simple wobbles we might know today. They were moulded into grand shapes, towers, castles, even entire gardens in miniature. Imagine a shimmering dome of crimson quivering under candlelight, as though it had a heartbeat of its own. A green jelly might sit beside it, translucent as stained glass, with pieces of fruit suspended like fireflies caught in amber. But oh, to arrive too early, what a sight you would see! The moulds would still be cooling in basins of water, some refusing to set, others sagging with impatience. Servants would hover nervously, praying that the jelly would hold its shape when turned out onto the plate. Guests were never meant to witness such fragile rehearsals. To see the jelly slump too soon was like catching a dancer stumble before her cue. When the hour finally struck and the jellies were brought in, the room softened with delight. Gasps, gentle laughter, the sparkle of spoons poised in anticipation. One guest might lean in and whisper, "Why, it's the closest thing to a stained glass window on a plate." Another might marvel at the wobble, hypnotic and oddly soothing. And when at last the spoon cut through, the jelly quivered as though laughing silently, before yielding with a sweet sigh. The taste? Cool, refreshing, often laced with fruit wine or citrus, a bright contrast to the heavier roasts and pies that came before. Children adored it, adults admired it, and hosts considered a successful jelly the crown of the evening. Can you picture the glow of it trembling on silver dishes, the colours glowing like lanterns against the dark-panelled room? The jelly was both frivolous and serious, silly in its wobble but vital in its timing. Arrive early and you saw uncertainty, arrive late and you saw perfection. And so, as the last spoonfuls vanish and the guests lean back in their chairs, the hum of conversation slow and steady, let us slip away once again. The night is cool, the stars hazy, and somewhere else another dinner waits, another story, another small yet meaningful ritual in the long play of Victorian dining. Now, let us wander to a seaside town, the year 1873, where the salt air drifts in through half-opened shutters and the sound of waves murmurs faintly beneath the clink of dishes. Tonight's meal is special, for the centerpiece is oysters, a delicacy that carried both luxury and risk. Picture the platters arriving, shells nestled on beds of crushed ice, glistening with seawater, their briny scent sharp and alive. Guests leaned in with curiosity, some eager, others hesitant. The oyster was both admired and feared, raw, slippery, and mysterious. Yet in the Victorian imagination, it was the height of fashionable indulgence. But imagine arriving too early, slipping through the door before the hour. You'd find the kitchen alive with scrapes and grunts, servants prying open shells with knives, fingers damp and raw from the effort. The glamour of oysters was fragile. It depended on timing. Too soon, and you saw the labour, the grit, the mess of seawater dripping onto wooden boards. Too late, and the oysters dulled, their freshness fading with each moment. At the table, though, when served just right, the oysters were greeted with murmurs of delight. Guests tipped them back, the taste of the sea washing across their tongues, bright and cold. Some added a squeeze of lemon, others a drop of vinegar, the sharpness cutting through the brine. And always there was talk. Oysters carried whispers of romance, vitality, and indulgence, though few admitted it aloud. Can you hear the faint pop of a shell opening, the scrape of knife against hinge, the sigh of satisfaction as a guest leans back with a smile? It is a quiet theatre, one played in miniature, yet every detail mattered. And as the oysters are cleared away, leaving behind only shells like pale echoes of the sea, the conversation drifts into softer tones. The waves outside keep their rhythm, and the night air carries a chill that makes the candles flicker. We step out once more, leaving the seaside hum behind, ready to find another home, another table, another curious dish where timing meant everything. Come with me now to the year 1867, into the grand hall of a countryside estate where the ceiling is high, the chandeliers shimmer, and the echo of footsteps carries softly across marble. Tonight's dinner is meant to impress, and the centerpiece is roast pheasant, its feathers once as iridescent as jewels, now replaced with a glaze that shines golden in the candlelight. Picture it. The bird brought in whole, set upon a silver tray with sprigs of parsley and roasted apples tucked neatly beside it. The skin crackles under the carving knife, and the scent, rich, gamey, touched with herbs, floats through the room, pulling every guest a little closer to their plates. It is not an everyday dish, but a performance meant to say, here is wealth, here is refinement, here is mastery of the hunt itself. Now imagine the folly of arriving early. Step into the kitchen before the proper hour and you'd find the pheasant still roasting, the cook anxiously basting, the smell smoky but not yet refined. Worse still, the bird might be underdone, the juices too red, the skin pale, robbed of its theatrical entrance. Guests were never meant to see pheasant in this half-formed state. It would be like catching a violinist plucking strings before tuning. At the table, however, when the timing was just right, the pheasant became a kind of spell. Forks clinked, knives slid neatly, conversation softened into sighs of approval. Even the silence that sometimes fell, a rare hush among talkative diners, spoke of reverence. To taste pheasant at its peak was to taste a fleeting moment, the exact turning of time into tenderness. Do you hear the hush of admiration? The fire crackling low behind the chairs, the faint rustle of silk as a lady leaned in closer for her slice. This was the rhythm of Victorian dining. Each dish not just eaten, but staged, and always shielded from premature eyes. And so, as the bones are cleared away and the platters gleam empty in the lamplight, the night grows softer, the guests lean heavier against their chairs, and we slip once more into the cool air outside. Another home, another table, another curious scene waits ahead, where the smallest turn of timing might decide whether a dish became triumph or embarrassment. Now we step into the year 1884, into a dining room heavy with velvet drapes and the scent of polished mahogany. The table tonight is arranged with unusual anticipation, for the course to come is turtle soup, a delicacy that, in the Victorian imagination, stood for opulence itself. Picture the tureen carried in, steaming polished ladle gleaming in the candlelight. The soup within is dark, rich, almost silky, its surface broken only by rising curls of steam. Guests lean forward as the first portions are poured, their spoons ready, conversation pausing in reverent expectation. To taste turtle soup was to taste extravagance, a dish imported with difficulty, prepared with great patience, and served with a flourish meant to impress even the most jaded diner. But imagine arriving too early. You would walk past the kitchen door at the wrong moment and catch sight of the turtle not yet transformed. Shells stacked awkwardly, broth still cloudy, cooks muttering over simmering pots. The magic was fragile, and its illusion depended on timing. Too soon, and you would see effort without elegance. Too late, and the soup's fragrance would dull, its richness fading into heaviness. At the table, however, in its perfect moment, turtle soup was praised in diaries and letters. One guest wrote in 1879 that it was a dish that seems to warm one's very bones, yet float on the tongue like velvet. Such praise was not uncommon, for the Victorians loved their metaphors almost as much as their soups. Can you hear it? The gentle clink of ladle against tureen, the soft slurp of the first taste, the sigh of satisfaction that follows. Around it the room glows, softened by port and candlelight, while outside the world is cold and dim. And so, as the tureen is carried back to the kitchen and the guests lean back in quiet pleasure, let us leave this room of velvet and velvet words. Out into the fog once more we step, ready to find another table, another dish, another moment where timing and appearance meant everything in the theatre of Victorian dining. Come with me now into a smaller, humbler home, a terraced house in Manchester in the year 1871. The windows are streaked faintly with coal dust, the air outside heavy with the murmur of factories, but inside the dining table has been laid with quiet care. Tonight's centrepiece is not pheasant or turtle soup, but a rice pudding. Simple, comforting, and beloved by families across the country. Picture the dish, baked in an earthenware pan, its surface golden brown with a soft, sweet skin that wrinkles like silk. Beneath lies the heart of it, warm rice thick with milk, flavoured faintly with nutmeg and sometimes a curl of lemon peel. It's not glamorous, no chandelier-worthy spectacle, but it is steady, familiar and soothing. To many Victorians, rice pudding was the taste of home itself. Now imagine the mistake of arriving too early. The pudding, still in the oven, would sit pale and bubbling, its fragrance promising comfort but not yet ready to deliver. If served before its time, the rice would still be firm, the milk watery, the skin not yet formed. The illusion of abundance would collapse into disappointment. Timing, as always, was everything. But when brought out at just the right moment, when the crust had browned, when the spoon slid in and the rice gave way softly, the pudding seemed to carry with it all the warmth of the hearth. Children smiled, parents sighed, even weary guests felt a soft ease spread through them. A slice of rice pudding was less a dish and more a lullaby, a reminder that sometimes the simplest food holds the deepest comfort. Do you hear it? The scrape of the spoon against the dish, the faint hum of conversation mellowing as the sweetness fills each guest with quiet contentment. The fire burns low, the night air presses softly against the window, and the whole room feels drowsy with satisfaction. And so, as the pudding dish is emptied and only traces of milk and spice remain, let us step out again into the cool Victorian night. Another home, another table, another story waits, where timing and preparation shape not only the meal but the memory of it. Now, let us drift into the year 1862 to a townhouse not far from Covent Garden. The lamps flicker in the misty evening, and from the open windows floats the faint scent of sugar and butter. Tonight's pride of the table is a trifle, layer upon layer of sponge, custard, fruit and cream, assembled with such care it seems almost architectural. Picture it standing tall in its glass dish, sponge fingers soaked in sherry, a layer of tart jam glistening like a ruby, custard golden and thick, fruit jewels pressed against the glass, and whipped cream billowing at the top like a snowy peak. Guests gathered round would murmur at the sight of it, each layer visible, each colour glowing in the candlelight. But imagine arriving before the appointed time. You would wander into the kitchen and see the trifle half-built, sponge stacked but bare, custard cooling in bowls, fruit waiting to be sliced. The illusion would crumble. What seemed later like a miracle of beauty and balance would appear instead as a messy construction project, spoons clattering, fingers sticky with jam. The Victorians, with their love of polished appearances, dreaded such premature revelations. At the right hour, though, the trifle carried a kind of gentle magic. Guests dipped spoons into its soft layers, breaking the perfection with laughter and delight. The flavours mingled, sweet sponge, sharp fruit, creamy custard, each bite different, each bite comforting. Diaries from the time speak fondly of trifles as a dish of many whispers, where no single taste dominated, but together they sang. Do you hear it? The soft clink of glass, the murmur of approval, the sighs of children allowed a spoonful more than expected. The fire glows low, the cream melts faintly on the tongue, and the evening settles into a rhythm as sweet as the dessert itself. And so, as the last spoonfuls are taken and the dish shows its empty sides, let us slip once again into the cool London street. The lamps hiss faintly in the fog, and another household waits ahead, with another dish, another tale, another small reminder that in Victorian life timing was everything. Step with me into the year 1877, into a dining room softened by candlelight and warmed by the steady glow of a coal fire. Tonight, the course everyone waits for is roast beef, a dish so central to Victorian identity that it was celebrated in song, in prints, even in political speeches. To carve beef at the table was to carve a symbol of strength, tradition, and plenty. Picture the joint of beef carried in on a silver tray, juices glistening, the scent of rosemary and pepper filling the room. The carving knife gleams as it slices through the crisp edge, revealing tender, rosy meat within. Guests lean in, the anticipation palpable, plates ready to be filled with hearty slices. The gravy, rich and dark, is poured generously, pooling like molten comfort across the dish. But imagine arriving early, slipping in before the proper moment. In the kitchen you would see the beef still turning on the spit, the cook basting with anxious precision, the air heavy with smoke. Too soon, and the meat is pale, the fat not yet crisp, the juices not yet coaxed into their perfect rhythm. The grandeur would be spoiled, the theatre ruined. At the table, however, roast beef was a triumph. Forks clinked, conversation brightened, and even the sternest guest softened after their first mouthful. The Victorians saw in it a kind of national pride. Solid, hearty, dependable. A guest in 1877 wrote that to be served beef in its prime is to know the strength of England upon one's tongue. Do you hear it? The carving knife whispering through the joint, the hiss of gravy poured, the soft sighs of approval that follow. The fire hums low, the room glows with both warmth and satisfaction, and time itself seems to slow. And so, as the platters empty and the bones are cleared away, the evening leans toward its quieter hours. Let us step once more into the cool night air, leaving the echo of knives and laughter behind, and walk toward another home, another dish, another story in this slow theatre of Victorian dining. Now let us find ourselves in the year 1882 in a townhouse where lace curtains dim the street lamps and the sound of a piano drifts faintly from the parlour. Tonight the table glows with anticipation for a dish both curious and beloved, blancmange. Blancmange was a soft moulded dessert, pale as ivory and trembling delicately under the weight of a spoon. Made from milk thickened with isinglass or gelatin, flavoured with almonds or rosewater, it arrived at the table as though it had been sculpted from moonlight itself. Imagine it sitting in its mould, smooth, glossy, reflecting the candles like a pool of still water. But step through the kitchen door too early, and you would see its secret. Bowls of milk cooling, powders being stirred, moulds filled and balanced precariously in ice. Blancmange in the making was far less romantic, lumpy, uneven, uncertain of its shape. To arrive before the right time was to pierce the illusion, to see the moonlight before it had taken form. At the table, though, when served just right, blancmange was greeted with gentle admiration. Spoons slipped in, the dessert quivered politely, and its cool sweetness melted softly on the tongue. Children loved it for its wobble, adults for its refinement. Diaries describe it as a dish both playful and dignified, which may be the most Victorian compliment possible. Do you hear it? The delicate scrape of spoons against porcelain, the low laughter of guests charmed by something so simple, so light. The fire murmurs, the candles burn low, and conversation slows into softer tones as the night deepens. And so, as the last slice of blancmange disappears and the dish is carried away, we step out once again into the cool air of the street. Another household waits, another dish, another moment in this slow dance of timing and taste. Come with me now into the year 1870, to a country estate where the night sky outside is wide and filled with stars, though the dining room glows too brightly for anyone inside to notice. The air carries the faintest trace of wood smoke and polished silver. Tonight's centrepiece is something hearty, almost rustic, yet dressed up for its place in the grand sequence of courses, a venison stew. Picture the dish arriving in a heavy tureen, its lid lifted to release a fragrant wave of red wine, herbs, and tender meat. The steam curls upward, carrying with it the earthy scent of the forest, a reminder of hunts past and landscapes beyond the candlelit walls. Ladles dip deep, filling plates with a warmth that seeps straight into the bones. But what if you had arrived too early? Step into the kitchen before the hour, and you would see the stew still bubbling, meat not yet tender, vegetables floating stubbornly at the surface. The smell would be sharp, unfinished, more sour than soothing. To catch venison stew before its time was to interrupt a symphony mid-rehearsal, to see only noise where harmony was meant to be. At the table, though, when the moment was right, the stew became a comfort disguised as luxury. Guests sighed as the first bite melted softly, the richness balanced with root vegetables sweetened by hours of patient simmering. One guest wrote in 1870 that a good venison stew seems to hush the room, for it requires nothing but quiet savouring. Can you hear it? The soft clink of ladles, the faint scrape of spoons, the gentle hush of a room lulled into contentment. The fire snaps once, then settles, as if it too is soothed by the meal. And so, as the tureen empties and the scent lingers faintly in the air, we step back into the cool night, the sky wide and dark above us. Another doorway glimmers in the distance, another story waits, another dish poised at the delicate edge between chaos and perfection. Now, let us drift into the year 1865, into a well-appointed townhouse not far from Bath, where the lamps glow amber and the evening carries the gentle hush of rain against the windows. Tonight, the course is not heavy or elaborate, but bright and almost playful. Candied fruits. Imagine the platter as it enters the dining room. Slices of orange, strips of lemon peel, even cherries, all simmered in syrup until their skins gleam like jewels. Some are dusted faintly with sugar, sparkling as though winter frost had kissed them. Others shine smooth and glossy, catching candlelight in tiny glimmers of gold and red. guests lean in with murmurs, the fruit both familiar and made strange, transformed into something delicate and festive. But picture arriving too early. In the kitchen, pots of syrup would still be bubbling, fruit skins softening, the air sticky and sharp with citrus steam. The magic not yet finished, the fruit still stubborn, refusing to take on its shine. To see candied fruits before their time was to see paint half mixed on the palate, not yet ready to become art. At the table, though, candied fruits brought smiles. A guest might bite into an orange slice and feel both sweetness and bitterness at once, like a memory both fond and sharp. A child might marvel at the sparkle of sugar crystals before popping a cherry into their mouth. The Victorians, who loved contrasts, found in candied fruit a small delight that balanced the heavier roasts and puddings of their long evenings. Do you hear it? The faint crunch of sugar, the gentle laughter as a guest holds a slice to the candle to admire its glow. Around it, conversation softens, the rain patters steadily outside, and the fire hums low in its grate. And so, as the last sweet morsels vanish and fingers are brushed discreetly on napkins, let us leave this house glowing with lamplight. Another door waits just beyond the rain-slick street. Another dish. Another story in the slow and soothing theatre of Victorian dining. Now, let us step softly into the year 1886, into a dining room where gilt mirrors shimmer faintly in the candlelight, and a faint draught from the chimney carries the smell of spice across the table. Tonight's dish is not pudding, nor pie, nor roast, but something with a gentle mystery, mulligatawny soup. This curious soup, drawn from Anglo-Indian influence, was a favourite among adventurous Victorians. Imagine the tureen lifted, its lid releasing steam fragrant with curry, pepper and chicken stock, a warmth that carries both the comfort of broth and the intrigue of spice. Guests lean forward, intrigued, spoons poised to taste something both familiar and foreign, a dish that hinted at faraway lands while still nestled in the safety of a London dining room. But suppose you arrived too early, step into the kitchen before the hour, and you would find the broth still cloudy, spices not yet blended, the scent sharp and uneven. The cook would stir with furrowed brow, tasting, adjusting, coaxing balance into the pot. Too soon, and the illusion of the refinement dissolved into chaos. The dish's beauty was in its harmony, and harmony required patience. At the table, though, mulligatawny soothed as much as it excited. The heat of spice spread slowly across the tongue, softened by rice or lentils, followed by the comfort of tender chicken. Guests sipped, some remarking on its novelty, others pretending familiarity, though most had never tasted anything quite like it. Diaries of the time note it as a soup both warming and strange, a comfort that whispers of distance. Do you hear it? The ladle dipping, the gentle clink of spoons, the hum of conversation tempered by the steady glow of spice. Outside, the night air is cool, but here warmth gathers in bowls, in breaths, in laughter softened by satisfaction. And so, as the tureen empties and the last drops of golden broth are savoured, we step again into the night. Another street waits, another doorway opens, another table offers a dish shaped as much by timing as by taste. Now we drift into the year 1874, to a handsome townhouse in Kensington where the parlour glows softly with lamplight, and the air carries the faint perfume of polished brass. Tonight's dinner holds a treat that many considered both a delicacy and a novelty, aspic. Picture it arriving at the table, a shimmering mould of savoury jelly clear as glass, inside of which are suspended pieces of meat, vegetables or even eggs, like tiny relics captured in amber. Guests lean in to marvel, some with admiration, others with quiet hesitation, for aspic was equal parts spectacle and puzzle. How could something so strange, so glistening be food? Yet, in the Victorian imagination, it was the height of refinement. But imagine arriving before the proper hour. You would see the aspic still in its mould, refusing to set, liquid trembling, the ingredients floating about like confused swimmers. Servants would pace nervously, hoping the chill of the ice house would finish its work in time. Too early, and the aspic was no triumph but a disaster, a half-born dish that seemed more potion than delicacy. At the table, however, when the aspic held its form, it gleamed like a jewel. A slice revealed its treasures, peas caught in suspension, perhaps a shred of chicken, perhaps a sprig of parsley. Guests tasted it with careful curiosity, the cool jelly dissolving slowly, leaving behind the savoury notes of broth and spice. Some found it delightful, others politely endured, but all agreed it was impressive. Do you hear it? The faint wobble as the knife slices through, the polite clink of forks, the half-suppressed chuckles at its strange beauty. The candles reflect off its glossy sides, casting tiny ripples of light across the tablecloth. And so, as the aspic is carried away and replaced with the promise of sweeter courses, we slip once more into the night air. The street is hushed, the fog curls low, and beyond the next lamplight another story waits. Another table laid, another dish poised between awkwardness and triumph. Now let us wander into the year 1889, into a townhouse warmed by coal fires and softened by the faint hum of voices drifting from the parlour. Tonight's table is brightened by something both indulgent and playful, the Victoria sponge cake. Picture it standing proudly on a silver stand, 2 golden sponge layers separated by a generous spread of jam and cream, the top dusted with a snowfall of powdered sugar. The cake catches the glow of the candles, its simplicity elegant, its sweetness promising comfort more than grandeur. To the Victorians, this sponge was not only dessert, but tribute. Named for the Queen herself, it carried an air of loyalty and familiarity, like a national hymn served in slices. But imagine stepping into the kitchen before the right time. You would see the sponges cooling on racks, still fragile, prone to collapse if touched too soon. The jam might be waiting in its jar, the cream not yet whipped, the halves bare and unfinished. The cake in this state looked less like a triumph, and more like an experiment abandoned halfway. Arriving early meant seeing the crown before the jewels were set. At the table, though, when presented complete, the Victoria sponge had a quiet kind of magic. Knives slid cleanly through the layers, releasing the scent of vanilla, the sweetness of jam brightening each bite. Guests smiled easily, conversation loosened, and even the stiffest patriarch might soften under the spell of something so modest yet so perfect. One diarist wrote in 1883, "A sponge such as this seems to hold both cheer and rest in every slice. Do you hear it? The delicate scrape of knife against plate, the low hum of appreciation as crumbs scatter, the gentle laughter that follows. The fire snaps once, then quiets, as though it too approves, and so, as the last slices are eaten and the stand sits empty but glowing, let us slip again into the cool night. Another door waits, another household readies its dishes, another small scene in the endless theatre of Victorian dining, where timing meant as much as taste. Step now with me into the year 1878, into a drawing room glowing with candlelight, the windows rattling faintly with the wind outside. Tonight's table is crowned not with sponge or aspic, but with mince pies, small, spiced treasures that brought warmth to winter evenings. Picture them on a tray, their golden crusts dusted lightly with sugar, the scent of cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves drifting across the room. Inside each pie, the filling glistens with fruit and suet, rich and dark, sweet yet savoury. To bite into one is to taste the comfort of spice against the chill of night, a reminder of hearth and festivity even in the heart of ordinary days. But imagine the scene if you slipped in before the right time. In the kitchen, the pies would still be baking, their crusts pale, their filling bubbling up impatiently, the air sharp with half-formed spice. A tray pulled too soon from the oven would sag, the crust collapsing under its own steam. Such a sight stripped away the charm, leaving only work in progress where wonder was meant to be. At the proper hour, though, when served hot and whole, mince pies filled the room with a kind of quiet cheer. Guests leaned in, breaking crusts with soft cracks, steam rising like whispered secrets. Some dabbed at the corners with napkins, others chuckled at the stickiness of the fruit, all sharing in the small delight together. One lady wrote in 1875 that mince pie by candlelight tastes of home and heaven both at once. Do you hear it? The crunch of crust, the faint sigh of satisfaction, the murmurs of praise softened by spice and sweetness. The fire hums steadily, the night presses softly at the glass, and the room glows with the hush of contentment. And so, as the tray empties and the crumbs are brushed away, we slip once more into the cool dark of the Victorian street. Another lamp flickers in the mist ahead, another doorway opens, and another dish waits to carry us deeper into this gentle theatre of dinners long past. Now we step into the year 1887, into a dining room softened by lace curtains and warmed by a coal fire that breathes steadily in the grate. Tonight's table carries a dish both rustic and refined, shepherd's pie. Picture it as it arrives from the kitchen, an oval dish with a crust of mashed potatoes baked golden, peaks browned just so, a faint crispness at the tips. The spoon breaks through to reveal savoury lamb beneath, rich with gravy, dotted with carrots and onions. The smell is hearty, comforting, like the countryside wrapped in warmth and brought to the city table. But imagine arriving too early. Step into the kitchen before the appointed hour, and you'd find the potatoes still being mashed, the lamb bubbling but not yet thickened, the whole dish pale and unready. Guests were never meant to see such half-finished work. The magic lay in the reveal, in the neat crust lifted to show its heart of warmth. Too soon, and shepherd's pie seemed less like comfort and more like chaos. At the table, however, served at the right time, shepherd's pie carried with it a kind of collective sigh. Guests leaned forward eagerly, spoons dipping deep, steam rising in soft curls. Conversation softened as the richness settled, each bite grounding the room in something familiar yet celebratory. One guest in 1882 remarked that shepherd's pie is the taste of hearth and soil dressed for company. Do you hear it? The spoon scraping gently against the dish, the quiet laughter as guests compare the crispness of crust, the murmur of satisfaction as warmth spreads from plate to heart. The candles flicker, the fire glows steady, and the night seems to pause. And so, as the dish is emptied and the spoon set down, we step again into the quiet street beyond. The fog curls low, the lamps hum faintly, and ahead another home waits, with another dish, another tale, another small rhythm in the long theatre of Victorian dining. Now, let us drift into the year 1868, to a modest but cheerful home in Yorkshire, where the kitchen fire burns bright against the chill outside. Tonight's dish is one beloved by households across England, Yorkshire pudding. Picture it puffed high in the pan, edges crisp and golden, centre soft and airy. When brought to the table, it is cut into generous squares, steam rising as if the dish itself sighs in relief to be eaten. Served often with roast beef and rich gravy, Yorkshire pudding was not merely a side dish, it was tradition, a taste of comfort baked into the very fabric of Victorian dining. But imagine stepping in too early. You would see the batter still liquid, pale and thin, waiting in the heat of the oven for its alchemy. Too soon, it looked more like porridge than pride, sloshing in the pan without dignity. Arriving before the pudding had risen was to rob it of its magic, to see the trick before the reveal. At the table, however, when the pudding stood tall, it became a triumph. Gravy soaked into its hollows, the crisp edges crumbled pleasantly under a fork, the centre melted softly on the tongue. Guests smiled at its familiarity, yet always praised its perfection. A letter from 1870 praised it as a dish both humble and noble, as cheering as a hymn and as hearty as a song. Do you hear it? The knife pressing through the crust, the laughter as gravy drips onto the plate, the soft scrape of forks as each bite disappears. The fire hums, the candles flicker, and the night seems to lean closer in approval. And so, as the last square of pudding is eaten and the platters carried away, we step again into the cool air of the street. Only one more doorway waits ahead, one more chapter in this gentle journey through the curious rules and quiet comforts of Victorian dining. Now we arrive at our final stop, the year 1890, in a grand townhouse where the chandeliers burn low and the night outside is quiet as velvet. Tonight's dinner closes with a dish that is less about taste and more about spectacle, the grand plum pudding. Picture it carried into the room, round and proud, dark as mahogany, studded with raisins and currants, almonds glinting faintly within. A sprig of holly crowns its top, green against the deep brown. The pudding is set ablaze with brandy, blue flames licking its sides, dancing like tiny spirits in the candlelight. Guests gasp softly, watching the fire shimmer before it fades, leaving only warmth and fragrance behind. But think of arriving too early, before the pudding had cooled and steamed, before it had been soaked with brandy. You might catch sight of it still tied in its cloth, hanging over a pot of water, or resting awkwardly on a kitchen counter, damp and plain. Stripped of ceremony, it would appear almost ordinary, its magic absent. For Victorians, timing was everything. The pudding's power lay in its arrival, in the blaze that turned dessert into theatre. At the table, though, when presented at the perfect moment, plum pudding was joy itself. Guests leaned forward, spoons ready, laughter mingling with the scent of nutmeg and clove. Each bite was rich, heavy with spice, softened by custard poured golden and smooth. Diaries of the time called it a dish of memory and merriment, and indeed, every spoonful seemed to carry echoes of hearth and home. Do you hear it? The quiet awe as the flames flicker, the soft clatter of spoons, the contented sighs of a table satisfied. The fire dwindles, the candles shorten, and the night settles into a hush that feels like closure. And so, as the last crumbs of pudding vanish and the plates are cleared away, our long journey through Victorian dining comes to an end. We have wandered through soups and roasts, puddings and pies, jellies and trifles, each dish shaped as much by its timing as its taste. The blue flames on the plum pudding have just sighed themselves out. Candles gutter, then steady. Around us, chairs ease back, spoons rest, and the room lets out that soft, sleepy exhale that comes only after a long Victorian dinner has sung its last note. We don't restart our tale. We simply keep walking through the same evening, the same age, following the little details that kept these nights stitched together. Let me draw you toward the quiet constellations between the big courses, the condiments and accompaniments, the tiny bowls that decided whether a roast felt triumphant or tired. You and I are still in that world of unspoken rules where arriving early is a social offence, and timing is the difference between magic and mishap. Remember Henry by the umbrella stand? Remember Clara learning the code of half-past? Those lessons linger here too, even in the smallest dishes. The household has slipped into its gentle end-of-evening rhythm. Footmen move like moths, silent and certain. From the sideboard comes a line of little gleams, a mustard pot with a petite silver spoon, a cut glass dish the colour of garnets, currant jelly waiting for lamb, a low bowl of horseradish white as new snow, a jar of chutney mellowed with ginger and clove. These never appeared a minute before their moment. Hosts guarded them the way a stage manager guards a cue. To put them out too soon, especially if some eager guest had blundered in early, was to lift the curtain on the crew, not the play. Do you hear that small music? Spoon to glass, lid to porcelain, the hush of breath when mustard's heat lifts into the nose. I take a slice of cold beef, rosy at the centre, neat at the edge, and give it a dab of bright mustard. The dish wakes up as neatly as a match-taking flame. Then a coin of pickled walnut, dark and glossy, brings a low, agreeable tang like a cello line under a melody. Tiny things, yes. But how often is comfort built from tiny things? Hosts practice placements with almost military care. Mustard every 3 seats, jelly flanking the mutton, pickles never so far that one must call across the cloth and stall the room's quiet hum. The rule of lateness even touched these bowls. If you arrived ahead of the clock, you risked seeing the chutney still in its jar, labelled damp from the pantry, the horseradish just grated, and making a footman blink away tears. It was not a punishable offence by law, of course, but by atmosphere. An early guest bruised the illusion. A date to anchor us. By the early 1870s, London tables brimmed with these little travellers, some entirely local, some learned from Empire. Mustards bright with turmeric, jellies clear as stained glass, chutneys softly spiced. I think of a diary line from 1875 praising a mango conserve that turns mutton into music. Funny, isn't it? How a spoonful can rehabilitate an overcooked slice more gracefully than any apology? Let your senses stroll. Vinegars sparkle from a dish of pickled cabbage, cool and clean, the velvet sweet slip of red currant jelly beside lamb, the quick, nose-tingling rush of horseradish that clears thought like a gust through curtains. If the roasts and pies were speeches, these were the asides that made the speeches lovable. Lady Marchmont, yes, the very one who once discovered poor Henry in the hall too early, kept her mustard under a little hinged lid shaped like a bee. She said it discouraged premature enthusiasm. Lady Pembroke, across the square, favoured a chutney recipe her brother swore he'd copied in Calcutta, though the cook claimed she improved it at every turn. Between such houses, condiments were a kind of friendly rivalry, traded like secrets and praised in careful, sleepy tones over the last of the wine. Watch how the servants do their work. A footman decants jelly without fogging the glass. A maid polishes the mustard spoon with the hem of a towel that never touches anything else. The butler places the horseradish last because its perfume can boss the room if given the chance. This too is why earliness stings. It shows the seams. The theatre works because backstage remains backstage. Outside, gaslight hums. Inside, the air is warm with a scent that's half spice, half beeswax. I ask you, quietly, have you known this in your own time? A small sauce that rescues a plain supper? A pinch of something that makes the familiar settle perfectly on the tongue? The Victorians would have nodded, pleased to find you fluent in their favourite dialect. Contrast. We linger as plates are exchanged for simpler ones, the tablecloth bearing only a soft constellation of crumbs and a little comet trail of jelly. Someone tells a low joke, someone else smiles into their glass. The punishable offence, arriving early, feels far away now, yet it still shapes the evening, the way the frame shapes a painting you no longer notice. Everything has come exactly when it should, and because of that, everything feels right. Let me leave you with one small, share-worthy surprise from these quiet bowls. The Victorians sometimes called red currant jelly the kindness of lamb. Isn't that lovely? A sweet, glistening kindness, catching candlelight as if it were bottled sunset. The closest thing, perhaps, to a polite hot pocket for meat. Heat traded for brightness, speed traded for timing. The fire settles. The room slides toward good nights. We won't restart anything. We simply drift with the same river as it rounds a gentle bend. In our next part, we'll follow one of these condiments from garden to jar to table, timing every step the way a host times a bell, so that nothing, not even a spoonful, arrives a minute too soon. The dining room hums like a hearth-fed hive, steady and low. Conversation floats in and out of awareness, as if words themselves have grown drowsy. The candles soften, shadows lean across the tablecloth, and yet there, between roast platters and crystal glasses, still glimmer those quiet accompaniments. Their presence is small, but their story long. Let us take just one, the horseradish. It begins, not in a jar or bowl, but deep in the soil of a kitchen garden. Imagine a root thick as a child's arm, pale and knotted, sleeping beneath the earth. To the untrained eye, it looks hardly worth the trouble. Yet to the Victorians, it was treasure. Dug up in autumn, washed in buckets of cold well water until the mud released its grip. The horseradish root was hauled into kitchens with the reverence of a prize. Peel it, and already the air stings with promise. Grate it, and the room fills with fire invisible, sharp enough to bring tears, strong enough to clear lungs. Servants prepared it carefully, for too much haste made the fumes unbearable. In some houses, a boy was sent out to grate it in the yard, so that the kitchen could breathe. From soil to table, timing mattered. Grated too soon, the root lost its strength. Served too late, it dulled into disappointment. But offered at just the right moment, lifted from its little bowl in a gleaming spoon, it carried the roast beef like a trumpet carries a hymn. Diaries note that by the 1870s, no respectable joint of beef reached the table without its companion of horseradish, fierce but fair. Do you smell it? That pungent rush, bright as lightning, prickling the nose, yet somehow soothing once the first shock passes. A guest leans in, dabs a small heap beside their slice, and pauses, knowing that the tiniest bite will do the work of a dozen seasonings. The Victorians loved such pairings. Lamb with mint sauce, venison with red currant jelly, beef with horseradish. Each was less a matter of taste than of ritual. To break the pairing would have been like setting a waltz to the wrong tune. Now let me tell you of one small mishap. In 1878, at a dinner in Bath, a guest named Mr. Wetherill, new to such affairs, mistook the horseradish for cream, heaped a generous spoonful upon his beef, smiled bravely, and swallowed. What followed was described, in a letter written the next day, as a display of watery eyes and trembling lips, as though the poor man had seen a ghost. His hostess, ever composed, simply remarked, "Our horseradish is not timid, Mr. Wetherill," and passed him a glass of claret. The tale was retold with gentle amusement for years after, a reminder that even condiments carried a kind of peril. Too much enthusiasm could undo you. Too much eagerness could embarrass you. Much like arriving too early, really, both crimes of timing, punished not with severity but with memory. Do you hear the quiet ripple of laughter, the gentle clink of glasses, the way the story of a condiment becomes the story of an evening? Even now, you and I can sit at that table, letting the fire's glow settle across our shoulders, letting the sharp scent of horseradish mix with the mellow sweetness of port. And as the bowls are lifted away, little spoons clinking softly, the room feels emptier, as though the condiments have taken their bow and left the stage. We are left with the echo of their sharpness, their brightness, their sweetness, all small reminders that perfection is built in details. Let your mind drift with me now, not to another course yet, but to the pantry where jars rest in rows gleaming in the lamplight. Pickles sealed tight, jellies clear as jewels, chutneys deep and dark with spice. Behind every dinner table was this quiet gallery, a world of patience and care hidden until the very moment it was needed. The fire pops, the room sighs, and the night deepens. We'll follow one of those jars soon, tracing its journey from garden to kitchen to table. But for now, let the calm weight of the evening settle in your chest. Let the rhythm of forks and spoons become the rhythm of breath, and let your eyes grow heavy with the thought that even the smallest dish held a story all its own. The room breathes in the way only late-night dining rooms do, slower, heavier, like the walls themselves are exhaling. The roasts are gone, the beef carved down to bones that gleam like relics, but the quiet stars of the evening, those little bowls of flavour, still shimmer in memory. Now, let us follow one, the red currant jelly. Imagine first the berry itself, small, translucent, hanging in clusters from thin green stems. In midsummer, when the days linger long and the air trembles with bees, the bushes gleam like chandeliers in miniature. A child reaching out could pluck a whole handful, warm from the sun, tart enough to pucker lips. But jelly is not born in a garden. No, jelly is born in the patient labour of kitchens. The berries are gathered into baskets, carried in the crook of arms, sometimes spilling a few red jewels along the path. In the scullery, they are rinsed in cool water, their stems discarded, their skins split with gentle pressure. Then they are simmered, slow and low, until their juices bleed into a clear ruby liquid. Do you hear the faint hiss of fruit against copper pot? Do you smell that soft, tangy perfume rising into the rafters? It's the kind of smell that makes you pause, that makes the heart remember summer even as autumn creeps in. The Victorians prized clarity. The jelly must be translucent like stained glass at morning service, not cloudy or thick. To achieve this, the juice was strained through fine muslin, dripping slowly overnight. A careless squeeze could ruin the purity, so patience was everything. In households that could afford it, special jelly bags were suspended from hooks, dripping drop by drop into porcelain bowls beneath. And then the sugar, white and grainy, gleaming like snow, was stirred in. Boiled again, but gently, until the mixture set just enough to tremble when cool. The jars were sealed with wax or paper tied tight with string, each labelled in the neat hand of a housekeeper. Red currant 1874, red currant 1879, shelved in rows like an orderly rainbow of years. Come winter, when the lamb was roasted, when the dining room glowed against the frost outside, the jelly emerged. A small spoon dipping into that red jewel, laying it against the soft pink of lamb flesh. Such contrast delighted the Victorians. It was not merely taste, it was spectacle. The colour against the meat was as important as the flavour against the tongue. Guests would murmur, almost as if complimenting a painting. So clear, one might say, holding the spoon so the candlelight passed through. Another might whisper, like garnet. It was a tiny marvel, but marvel enough to carry conversation when larger subjects felt too heavy. In 1862, a hostess named Mrs. Greaves wrote to her sister about a dinner where her jelly failed to set. She served it anyway, and it slid across the lamb like a crimson tide. Her embarrassment was deep enough that she noted it in her diary for weeks after. The jelly was my undoing. Imagine all the effort of roasts and puddings forgotten for the fault of a sauce. Yet that was the Victorian creed. Details mattered more than grandeur. Let your senses linger on the moment. The sweet tart sharpness at the edge of lamb's richness, the glimmer of red against white porcelain, the soft clink of the silver spoon. In such moments, the offence of earliness made itself felt once again. To arrive too soon might mean seeing the jelly in its muslin bag, dripping slowly, shapeless, its magic still asleep. You would witness labour, not wonder, and in this age, wonder was the point. Now, close your eyes with me and imagine the pantry shelf. Rows of jars, each glowing faintly as lamplight touches them. Raspberry beside red currant, gooseberry beside blackberry, a chorus of summers stored away for winter. The very sight would calm a heart, a promise of sweetness waiting in silence. Isn't it curious how a spoonful of jelly became as memorable as the main dish itself? Perhaps it is a lesson whispered across time, that the smallest touches, the overlooked details can decide the success of an evening. The fire sighs again, as though agreeing. The servants begin to clear, their steps cushioned against the rug, their motions practiced and patient. The dining room grows quieter, almost ready for good nights. And yet we remain, lingering with the taste of red currant still glimmering on the tongue, holding on to that faint jewel-bright sweetness as though it might keep the night from ending. And in our next part we'll follow the journey of another companion, the chutney, that Victorian souvenir of empire, rich with spice and story, a dish that carried worlds within a jar, yet always appeared as humbly as a spoon by the lamb. The dining room is almost hushed now, like a stage after the applause has faded. Plates are fewer, glasses less full, but one small jar remains to be remembered before we let the night slip into its own dreams. That jar is chutney. Close your eyes with me and picture its surface, deep brown, sometimes gold, sometimes flecked with crimson or green. It is thick, almost shy, and it doesn't sparkle the way jelly does. But open it, stir it, lift the spoon, and you'll find an entire world drifting up to greet you. Chutney, in the Victorian age, was a traveller. Its roots wound back to India, where fruits and spices were coaxed into blends that preserved flavour through the long stretch of heat. British officers and traders tasted it abroad, carried it home, and soon, by the mid-1800s, the jar of chutney had become a curiosity turned essential. By 1870, many households thought a dinner incomplete without it. Let me guide you into its making. Imagine a kitchen thick with scents. Vinegar sharp as a quick thought, ginger warming like a low fire, sugar melting slow, apples softened into velvet, raisins plumping as they drink the syrup. The cook stirs and stirs, her spoon heavy, the mixture bubbling like a pot of secrets. Steam rises, sweet and sour all at once, curling into the beams overhead. What did it taste like? Imagine biting into lamb that is rich, almost heavy, then adding a spoon of chutney that carries both fruit and fire. Suddenly the lamb is lighter, brighter, as though it has been dressed in sunlight. Or picture cold meats on the sideboard, pork pie, ham, beef tongue, and the chutney offering contrast like a violin line weaving through a brass march. The Victorians adored contrasts, savoury with sweet, heavy with light, sharp with smooth, and chutney gave them all of this in one spoonful. A guest at an 1881 dinner in Surrey described it as a company of flavours, none quarrelsome, all in spirited agreement. What a kind phrase. There was, too, a hint of pride in presenting chutney. To place it on the table was to suggest one's household had the reach of empire itself. This jar came not only from kitchen labour, but from ships and trade routes, from climates far away. It whispered of the world beyond the drawing room, wrapped politely in spice. Do you notice the way the servants handle it? Carefully, almost ceremonially. They know it stains linen if spilled, and its aroma carries through the room like a singer's note. The butler sets it down between the silver candlesticks, and in the soft glow the chutney glistens as though it holds the very warmth of foreign suns. And just like the horseradish, just like the jelly, timing mattered. Too soon, and you saw it still in the pot, boiling and restless. Too late, and its freshness dulled. But at the exact right moment, when lamb or cold meats called for it, chutney arrived as if by magic. Think, for a moment, of how odd it would have seemed to guess 2 centuries earlier. To pair spice with sweetness, vinegar with fruit, it would have sounded like mischief. But in the Victorian age, it was refinement. Sometimes, perhaps we live long enough to see yesterday's strangeness become today's necessity. The room is soft now. A chair creaks as someone leans back, eyes half closed. A log shifts in the fire, sending sparks up the chimney. The chutney jar is half empty, its spoon resting inside as though tired too. Guests whisper their thanks, rising slowly, shawls gathered, gloves drawn on. The last flavours of the night are lingering, sweet and sharp at once. And as we leave this table, still surrounded by condiments, still ruled by timing, we carry the memory of small things. A spoonful of jelly like a jewel, horseradish like lightning, chutney like a journey in a jar. They remind us that history is never only the grand, but often the delicate. Never only the feast, but also the seasoning. The offence of arriving early may have been punished by embarrassment, but the gift of arriving on time was this. Every small dish, every careful detail, arriving when it was most ready to delight. So now let your thoughts grow heavy as though you, too, have eaten well. Laugh gently and let the warmth of the fire cradle you. The night is deep, the table cleared, the pantry closed. Our next chapter will move us further still to follow how late-night suppers and small delicacies filled the spaces after great dinners had ended. But for now, stay in this quiet. Stay with the fading glow of spice, sugar, vinegar and fruit. Stay with the memory of a jar, simple on its surface, yet holding an entire world within. The fire has burned low, and the grand dinner is finished. But the night, as any Victorian would tell you, is not yet done. For just when you think the house is settling into silence, another ritual begins, quieter, humbler, yet no less steeped in history. The late-night supper. Imagine it with me. The grand dining table is cleared, candles snuffed, and guests retreat into drawing rooms. Conversation turns softer, more intimate, like a whisper after song. But as hours drift on, and the heavy roasts and puddings begin to fade into memory, something curious happens. A gentle hunger returns, not sharp but persuasive, the kind of hunger that does not demand a feast, but a morsel. And so, the late supper takes form. Servants move like shadows through the house. In kitchens below, platters appear. Thin slices of cold ham, beef carved into tidy cubes, cheeses fragrant and mild, bread still faintly warm if fortune smiles. Do you hear the soft thud of a loaf set on a board? The scrape of a knife drawing across its crust. The sound is as soothing as rain against a window. At times, these suppers were as modest as a tray of biscuits and a pot of tea. At others, they were miniature feasts designed to carry revellers through midnight hours of conversation, cards, or music. An 1864 account describes one such spread: oysters on ice, pigeon pies, anchovy toast, and a jug of mulled wine steaming gently beside. Small in portion, yet rich in spirit. And here is the charm of it. At late suppers, the rules relaxed. No punishments for early arrival now, for the supper came when whim called, not the clock. Guests wandered in as they pleased, picking at dishes with easy familiarity. The mood was less parade, more hearth. Even the grandest hostess could allow herself a sigh, a loosened ribbon, a softer laugh. Can you picture it? A low table by the fire, plates arranged without ceremony, the glow of embers painting shadows across the floor. A gentleman leans back in his chair, balancing a biscuit in one hand, a glass of sherry in the other. A lady, shoulders wrapped in shawl, chooses a sliver of cheese, smiling as though the smallest indulgence were enough to sustain a night's dream. One favourite dish of such hours was the oyster. Easy to serve, easy to season, endlessly adaptable. Victorians adored them, raw, stewed, baked in pies. So common, in fact, that oysters were the fast food of the 19th century, sold for pennies on street corners. Yet on a late-night table they seemed luxurious again. Little shells gleaming like moonlit treasures. There is something almost conspiratorial about these meals. Unlike the grand dinners with their punishments and protocols, these suppers felt like secrets shared. You did not arrive too early, for there was no wrong time. You did not speak too loudly, for the house itself was hushed. You did not judge too harshly, for hunger at midnight forgives all. Think of the comfort it must have given, after all the formality, the layered courses, the polished silver, to nibble a slice of bread spread with anchovy paste, to sip warm punch, to laugh quietly among friends whose masks had slipped for the evening. These were the moments when closeness was made. The late supper was not for display, but for memory. Outside, the night pressed against the glass, cool and endless. Inside, crumbs fell soft onto plates, and candle stubs burned down to nothing. The simplicity of it is what made it precious. Sometimes, perhaps we remember best not the orchestras and chandeliers, but the whispered hours when a piece of cheese and a sip of wine felt like treasure. And as the fire sighs low, as eyelids grow heavier, we too can linger in that late-night glow. For soon we will follow one particular dish of these hours, the humble anchovy toast, beloved of Victorian suppers, sharp enough to wake the palate, soft enough to soothe the heart. But that, dear friend, belongs to the next part. Let us turn the lamp a little lower, so its glow is gentler, and lean closer to one of the simplest yet most beloved comforts of a Victorian late-night table, anchovy toast. Now, anchovies are curious things. Tiny fish, salted until they gleam silver and briny, they seem almost too small to matter. Yet in the 19th century, they were the secret spark that turned ordinary bread into something almost indulgent. Imagine a loaf sliced thin, toasted just enough to whisper a crunch, then spread with a paste made from mashed anchovies, softened with butter, sometimes brightened with a squeeze of lemon or the faint heat of cayenne. A little salt, a little sea, a little fire, balanced upon warm bread that softened as you bit. The Victorians adored contrasts, remember? After the rich roasts of dinner, the sharp saltiness of anchovy toast was like a jolt of clarity, a reminder that flavour could be simple and direct. Guests who had grown weary from endless courses would lean forward, smile and admit, sometimes in hushed tones, that this, more than the lamb or pudding, was their favourite part of the evening. Picture it, a silver tray bearing neat triangles of toast, steam rising faintly, the scent sharp but inviting. Fingers reach, one by one, taking them not with the studied ceremony of the dinner table, but with an almost childlike eagerness. Laughter hums softly, and someone mutters that the toast is like eating the sea itself. A little dramatic, perhaps, but isn't that the way midnight makes us feel? Anchovy toast was also practical. Easy to prepare, it could be summoned quickly by servants when a guest lingered later than expected. It required no grand roasting, no boiling of puddings, just bread, butter, anchovies, and a steady hand. Yet for all its simplicity, it carried prestige. To serve it was to suggest one had both good taste and a stocked larder, ready to provide pleasure at odd hours. And oysters. Ah, they were the toast's companion, shimmering on platters nearby. Their shells, rough and ridged on the outside, concealed pearly interiors that gleamed in the candlelight. Some guests ate them raw, with only a splash of vinegar or lemon, the taste of tide and stone still clinging. Others preferred them stewed, nestled into little pies, or fried until golden. The Victorians were so enamoured with oysters that by the 1870s, London alone consumed millions each year. They were not yet the luxury they are today, but a common fare, even for the working poor. Yet at a midnight supper, they regained their magic. A shell pried open in the quiet hours felt like opening a secret, like discovering treasure under moonlight. Listen with me. The faint crack as a knife slides between shell halves, the gentle pop as the oyster yields. The sound is almost like a sigh, a tiny exhale from the sea itself. Place it on your tongue, and you taste brine, cream, iron, complex yet fleeting, gone in a swallow, leaving only a trace of ocean behind. The toast and the oyster, One sharp, one soft, one hot, one cool. Together they became the twin pillars of many late suppers. Not elaborate, not overwhelming, but satisfying in a way only midnight foods can be. And perhaps the true charm lay not in the dishes themselves, but in their setting. Imagine the drawing room now, curtains drawn against the night, a few candles still burning low, the fire reduced to embers. Outside, a carriage rattles faintly along cobblestones, fading into silence. Inside, laughter is softer, words slower, the kind of conversation that wanders without hurry. It is in such a room that anchovy toast and oysters mattered most. Not for their grandeur, but for their companionship. They were foods that whispered, stay a little longer, talk a little more, dream a little deeper, and as our eyes grow heavier, as though warmed by those very embers, let us drift next into the realm of cheese, the third companion of late-night tables, pungent, crumbly, and endlessly storied. It waits for us, a quiet wheel in the pantry holding its own tale of midnight comfort. The embers in the hearth are nearly gone, their glow softer now, like the last murmurs of a lullaby. The great feast has slipped into memory, the late supper trays of oysters and anchovy toast are nearly empty, and yet, if you listen closely, you can hear a faint clatter somewhere far off in the house. That sound does not belong to dinner or supper at all, but to something else. It is the sound of cheese being brought to table. Yes, cheese, that most ancient of foods, both humble and noble. Let me guide you into its presence. Imagine a wheel, sturdy and round, resting in the cool air of a pantry. The outer rind is rough, perhaps dusty with flour, perhaps rubbed with herbs, while within lies the creamy, fragrant heart. When it is cut, there is a hush, as if something secret has been revealed. A small wedge placed on a plate speaks of history as much as hunger. The Victorians adored their cheeses, and a late-night supper was rarely complete without them. There was cheddar, already famous, hard and sharp, first named after the caves of Somerset where it matured. There was Stilton, blue-veined and crumbly, carrying a scent strong enough to divide opinion. Some adored its pungency, others winced politely before nibbling. There were soft cheeses too, fresh and mild, spread on bread like butter, eaten quickly before they spoiled. Each one carried its own character, as distinct as a guest at the table. Now close your eyes and breathe it in. The scent of Stilton, bold and earthy, drifting like a ghost of meadow grasses and stone cellars. A bite crumbles against the tongue, salty and tangy, with veins of blue spreading like rivers across a map. It is not delicate, no, but it is persuasive, insistent, the kind of flavour that lingers long after the last note of music has faded. Cheddar, by contrast, is steady, firm, reliable, as though it carries the patience of the cave walls that nursed it into strength. It is the kind of cheese you trust, like an old friend who never fails to arrive on time. The Victorians often paired cheese with ale or port, believing the richness of one balanced the sharpness of the other. A guest might lean back in a chair, a small cube of cheese in hand, and sip slowly, letting the flavours mingle in a quiet duet. This was not the grand parade of the earlier courses. It was comfort food dressed in evening attire, the kind of comfort that felt at once rustic and refined. And what of the utensils? Imagine a small silver knife, its handle engraved, set beside the wheel. Its blade catches the faint light of the candles, glinting as it slices into the rind. The sound is a whisper, a faint crackle, then silence, followed by the soft weight of the wedge falling onto porcelain. Even this act, so simple, carries dignity. In a world where arriving early to dinner could be seen as a misstep, the serving of cheese was a gentle equalizer. Everyone, from the most elegant guest to the weariest host, could take a piece without fear of error. It is said that in 1851, the very first factory-made cheese appeared in the United States, a sign of modernity creeping into old traditions. But in Victorian England, cheese still carried with it the spirit of place. To eat cheddar was to taste Somerset. To eat Stilton was to walk through Leicestershire pastures. Each bite was geography disguised as food. And perhaps that is why it was so beloved. It grounded guests, reminded them of soil and stone, of fields and farmers, even as they sat in rooms of velvet and marble. Do you hear the soft laughter now, drifting over the table? Someone jokes that the Stilton is strong enough to walk by itself. Another insists that cheddar has the sturdiness of a soldier. These little remarks, said with warmth and wine, keep the night alive just a bit longer. Outside, the streets are quiet, lamps flicker, horses doze in stables. Inside, the last bites of cheese are savoured, as though they are the bridge between waking and sleep. There is a curious comfort in ending with cheese. It does not overwhelm, it does not dazzle, but it steadies the spirit. Like a lull at the end of a story, it carries you gently toward the close. Imagine it now, the tray being lifted, the knife set aside, the final wedges placed into cool storage. A candle guttering, a chair creaking, a sigh rising from someone who has eaten their fill. The night has grown deep, and with it, so too has our calm. And as we let this chapter drift into quiet, think of cheese not just as food, but as memory, aging slowly, revealing more character with time, persisting long after other flavours fade. The Victorians, with their rules and rituals, knew this truth, that sometimes the simplest dish at the quietest hour carries the most lasting comfort. So now, let your mind rest as though it too were a wheel of cheese settling in a cool cellar. The day is done, the supper ended, and sleep waits at the edge of the room, ready to take you into its care. The night outside has deepened further, and within the quiet house the fire burns low, casting shadows that seem to stretch like memories across the carpet. After cheese has been savoured, what remains for those who linger still? There is one last indulgence, one final ritual before true rest arrives. It is the moment for sweets, not the grand puddings of dinner, but humbler treats, the kind that appear like whispers at the edge of the evening. Close your eyes and picture it with me, a silver tray set down gently, carrying a medley of little things. Candied fruits, their skins glistening as though they've trapped sunlight. Ginger, crystallized into tiny cubes that sparkle faintly in the lamplight. Biscuits, simple and crisp, flavored perhaps with caraway or lemon. And in the center a bowl of sugared almonds, pastel in their coats of pink, white and pale green. These were not meant to dazzle, not meant to impress with grandeur. They were instead meant to soothe. Small, sweet reminders that the night was drawing to a close. In 1847, the invention of the first modern chocolate bar had begun to change how sweets were made and enjoyed. Imagine, then, a square of chocolate, still rare, still precious, melting slowly on the tongue of a guest who marvelled at how something so simple could feel so luxurious. The Victorians had a fondness for boiled sweets too, peppermints, barley sugar twists, lozenges pressed with cheerful little shapes. Perhaps you felt that same comfort, the way a hard sweet rests in the mouth, requiring patience, offering flavour in slow waves rather than quick bursts. There is something almost meditative in it, don't you think? As though the sweet is teaching you to linger, to slow down, to savour. And then, of course, there were the biscuits. Crisp, light, easy to share, they filled the role of companionship food. Imagine reaching into a tin, hearing the faint rattle of biscuits shifting, and selecting one that breaks with the softest snap between your fingers. A little flour dust clings to the edges, a reminder of the baker's hand, the oven's warmth. Dipped into tea or cocoa, the biscuit transforms, softer, warmer, almost melting, like a moment of comfort too fleeting to last, yet cherished all the more for it. What's remarkable is how these small confections were part of a larger rhythm. After the grandeur of the banquet, after the charm of the late supper, sweets were the lullaby. They closed the night gently, a soft landing after so much richness. And there was no punishment for eagerness here, no fear of arriving too soon. Guests might pluck an almond, bite into ginger, or nibble a biscuit as they pleased, the only rule being to enjoy without haste. Listen now to the sounds that would have filled such a room, the faint rustle of sugared almonds in their dish, the crunch of candied fruit between teeth, the stir of a spoon in cocoa. All small, all delicate, yet together forming a chorus of calm. Outside, perhaps the wind stirred the trees or a carriage rattled past, but inside the sweetness carried its own serenity. It was, in a way, the final conversation between host and guest. No speeches, no toasts, only the quiet gift of sweetness shared. How fitting that so many of these little foods, sugar, cocoa, almonds, came from far corners of the world, journeys across oceans compressed into something you could hold between finger and thumb. The world itself, distilled into sugar and spice, served at the hush of midnight. And so, as we let this moment rest, think of the way sweetness lingers, not just on the tongue, but in memory. The last taste before sleep, gentle and kind, carrying the warmth of company and the comfort of ritual. For the Victorians, these sugared moments were more than confections. They were farewells, delicate promises that the night had ended well. Now, let us set aside the tray. The sugared almonds are nearly gone, the ginger cubes half forgotten, the biscuits a few crumbs on porcelain. The candles gutter low. Outside, the stars continue their patient watch. And we, like the guests of that long-ago room, are ready at last to let go, to allow the sweetness of memory to guide us into dreams. The hush of the house has grown deeper still. The sweets have been tasted, the cheese trays cleared, and even the last biscuits are nothing more than soft crumbs on porcelain. Yet the Victorians, with their fondness for ceremony, often ended a long night not with food but with drink. A different kind of comfort, warming, soothing, steadying as the body prepared itself for rest. Let us sit together in that quiet drawing room now, where the fire has dwindled to ash, and the air smells faintly of sugar, smoke and polished wood. What do you imagine is set before us? A glass of port, perhaps, dark and velvety, its sweetness thick enough to cling to the tongue? Or mulled wine, fragrant with cloves and cinnamon, the steam rising like a ghost into the chill air? The Victorians prized these night drinks not only for their taste, but for their ability to slow the mind, to ease conversation into softer tones, to carry the night gently towards silence. Port was a favourite. Imported from Portugal, it carried with it a history of trade, of alliances, of barrels rolling off ships into English docks. Imagine the dark ruby liquid poured into a small glass, the way it caught the lamplight like garnet. A sip brought sweetness, yes, but also depth. Raisins, oak, the faint shadow of stone cellars where it had aged patiently. For many it was the very definition of an evening's close. Steady, enduring, respectful of the night. But for others, mulled wine was the greater comfort. Picture a pot simmering gently on the hearth. Red wine joined by sticks of cinnamon, whole cloves, nutmeg grated fresh, and perhaps a curl of orange peel. The air around it is perfumed, inviting, almost festive, even on an ordinary night. To cup such a drink in your hands is to feel warmth travel from palms to chest, to let spice and sweetness loosen the edges of the day. The Victorians would sometimes add sugar, sometimes a dash of brandy, each house with its own little secret for making the night's brew. And then, of course, there was punch, a word that might make you think of frivolity, yet in Victorian times it held its own dignity. A great bowl carved from glass or silver, filled with a blend of spirits, citrus and spice. Ladles dipping, glasses clinking, laughter rising. But late at night, when the house was quieter, punch was gentler, softer, the final touch for those reluctant to let the evening end. If wine and punch were too heavy, there was always tea. Ah, tea, the eternal companion of the English table. Even at midnight a pot might be steeped, its leaves unfurling in hot water, releasing scents of bergamot, jasmine, or simple black tea. A sip of tea was like a sigh, a settling of thoughts, a reminder that not every close required grandeur. Sometimes, all one needed was the quiet comfort of a familiar flavour, sipped slowly, eyes half closed. Do you hear the sound? The faint clink of glass against glass, the low murmur of a final toast. Perhaps a host raises his glass gently, not with pomp but with warmth, saying nothing more than to friendship or to a night well spent. The words matter less than the act, the simple acknowledgement that the night has been shared, that the company has mattered, and as the drinks are sipped, conversation grows slower. Voices lower, pauses longer, laughter softer, until finally the room itself seems to grow drowsy. One by one, glasses are emptied and set aside. The scent of wine, spice and tea lingers faintly, like a shadow that does not wish to leave. The Victorians understood something we often forget, that the end of an evening is not a fall but a fade. To move from bustle to stillness requires ritual, and a final drink was that ritual. Not to intoxicate, not to overwhelm, but to guide. Like a soft hand on the shoulder it said, "It is time now. The night has given all it can. Rest awaits." And so, as the last guest leans back in their chair, as eyes grow heavy and candles gutter low, let us imagine one more sip. Warm, sweet, steady. The taste lingers for a moment, then dissolves, leaving only quiet. The house is still, the hour is late, and sleep, like a faithful guest, finally takes its place at the table. The house is nearly silent now, and yet, in the softened glow of the last candles, there remains one more ritual before true rest begins. After the food, after the cheese and sweets, after the port and tea, comes something less about eating or drinking and more about the gentle unwinding of conversation itself. The Victorians called it the withdrawing hour, the time when guests drifted from the dining table into parlours and drawing rooms, when the rhythms of the evening shifted from structure into a quiet looseness, like threads unravelling into comfort. Picture it with me, the heavy dining chairs pushed back, the clatter of silverware fading, the polished table left to rest. Men and women alike rise, smoothing their garments, some stretching discreetly after hours of formality. The air is still fragrant with spice and candle smoke, with faint traces of roasted meat and sugared almonds. But now the room begins to empty, footsteps soft against carpets as the company moves elsewhere. The ladies often retired first, gathering in a smaller drawing room where softer light and gentler chairs awaited them. Here the conversation shifted in tone, lighter, more playful, unbound by the etiquette of the dining table. A piano might be uncovered, and fingers brushed across keys in idle notes. Nothing so demanding as a concert, only a tune, perhaps a ballad remembered, perhaps a dance song slowed into a lull. The sound carried like a soft current, filling the silence without overwhelming it. The men, meanwhile, often lingered for a time over cigars and brandy, the air turning faintly blue with smoke. Imagine the glow of embers at the tips of cigars, the rich smell of tobacco curling upward like ghostly ribbons. Their voices, deeper, slower, spoke of politics, of trade, of matters left unspoken in mixed company. Yet even here, the sharp edges of debate dulled under the weight of a long evening. By the time they joined the ladies again, their words were slower, their laughter easier. And in this rejoining, in this mingling of small groups late into the night, there was a curious peace. No longer bound to courses or timings, guests found themselves drifting into pockets of conversation. A woman might sit near the fire, turning sugared almonds absently in her hand as she shared a quiet story. A man might lean back, a book taken from the shelf, reading aloud a passage to a friend who dozed half listening. The room became not one conversation, but many, overlapping like waves, none hurried, none forced. What fascinates me is how ritual gave way to this looseness, and yet both were necessary. Without the formality of dinner, the unwinding would have lacked contrast. Without the unwinding, the dinner would have ended too abruptly. It was in this balance, the firmness of ritual, the gentleness of release, that Victorian evenings found their rhythm. Listen now to the quiet music of it. A few notes on the piano, the soft creak of a chair, the murmur of voices lowered nearly to whispers. A clock ticks faintly in the hall, marking time that no one now cares to count. The evening is no longer about the clock, no longer about arrivals or offences or courses. It has dissolved into companionship, into the simple act of being together in stillness. And sometimes, in these late hours, small amusements would appear. A card game played lazily, not for stakes but for laughter. A book of poetry passed around, each guest reading a stanza before handing it on. Even parlour games, the kind that required no great effort, only a willingness to smile. Shadows cast against the wall might prompt charades, and laughter would rise once more, Not loud but warm, the kind of laughter that makes eyelids heavy, that eases the body toward rest. Do you feel it now? That strange sweetness of a night winding down. You know you should sleep, yet you linger a little longer, unwilling to let go. The Victorians knew that feeling too. They stretched it with cigars, with pianos, with poetry, with almonds and tea, until the hour grew late enough that no one could resist sleep's call. And so, one by one, guests would begin to rise. Coats gathered, carriages called, farewells spoken in voices that carried both weariness and gratitude. The rooms grew emptier, the fire sank lower, and at last only the hosts remained, listening to the silence settle in once more. That was the true end of a Victorian dinner. Not the last course, not the last drink, but the last goodbye. A slow fading of company into memory until the night itself seemed to fold closed like a book. And as we leave this chapter, let us too imagine ourselves withdrawing. Our own day, long and filled, has found its soft ending. The conversations of our thoughts grow quieter, the fire in our minds burns lower, and what remains is only stillness. Let us take that stillness with us now, carrying it gently into dreams. The house is quiet now. All the laughter, the music, the endless courses of the Victorian table have faded into memory, and only the gentle hush of the night remains. Picture it with me, friend. The candles burned low to small pools of wax, the heavy curtains drawn against the cool air outside, and the last traces of food and drink cleared away. The great dining table that once carried roast meats, puddings, biscuits and wines now rests in silence, polished wood gleaming faintly in the dim light. The guests, one by one, have departed. Their carriages rattle down the cobblestone streets until the sound was no more than a murmur swallowed by fog. Cloaks were gathered, farewells exchanged, and doors closed softly behind them. Each guest carried home not just the weight of the meal, but the memory of companionship, of warmth, of laughter folded gently into the late hours. Inside the house, servants move quietly, almost invisible. Silverware is gathered, linens folded, glasses polished for another day. A stray almond lies forgotten in a dish. A book rests half open on a chair. A faint wisp of cigar smoke lingers in the drawing room. These are the small ghosts of the evening, reminders that just hours ago the house was alive with voices. Now it is the stillness that speaks. The host lingers for a moment longer, walking slowly through the empty rooms. They pause by the hearth, watching the embers sink into ash. They glance at the piano where a melody once danced, the key cover now lowered like eyelids closing for sleep. With a quiet sigh, half relief, half satisfaction, they let the night's rituals fall away. Every detail, every course, every custom has been observed. The evening has been complete, and we too have walked this path together. From the strict etiquette of the Victorian table to the smallest delicacies tucked onto porcelain plates, we have drifted through cheese courses, puddings, sugared almonds, ports and teas. We've heard the rustle of gowns, the strike of matches, the murmur of late-night conversations near the fire. And as each chapter unfolded, we, like the guests, have come closer and closer to the quiet ending of the night. Now it is time to let go. No more arrivals, no more toasts, no more whispered jokes between bites. The story has given all it can, and the silence of the house invites you, just as it invited them, to rest. Close your eyes now. Feel the stillness settle around you the way velvet curtains fall over tall windows. Let your breath slow, like the steady ticking of the clock in the hallway. Outside, the night is deep and calm, the stars keeping their watch as they always have. Inside, the fire has gone to sleep, and so too may you. This is where we leave the Victorians, their dinners, their rituals, their long goodbyes. And this is where you may find your own rest, free of clocks, free of carriages, free of anything but comfort. So I will not say good evening. Instead, I will whisper gently, good night, dear friend. May your dreams be soft. May your rest be deep, and may you awaken with the calm that only such nights can give. Sweet dreams, always.